The report landed on Admiral Sen Rawl's desk at the quietest hour of the ship's cycle, when most of the crew was asleep and the bridge ran on skeleton staff. He did not sleep. He rarely did before a deployment. He poured himself a glass of cold water, sat down, and read. Target 7. Third planet from a yellow star. One moon, breathable atmosphere, vast oceans. The dominant species, bipedal, soft-bodied, no natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. Average body temperature slightly above standard. Average lifespan, 79 years. They called themselves humans. The Dominion's threat assessment sat at the bottom of the report in clean, official text. Threat Level 1. Rawl set the glass down. He had seen threat level 1s before. Small, frightened creatures that curled into themselves the moment the fleet appeared in their sky. Species that surrendered before a single shot was fired. They were not cruel about it. The Dominion simply arrived, demonstrated power, and waited. It was efficient. It was clean. He authorized the deployment order and went back to sleep. What Rawl did not know, and what none of the 17 civilizations in the Galactic Dominion had thought to ask, was a very simple question. Not what the humans were, but what they had survived. The planet had not always been kind to them. 66 million years before the fleet arrived, a rock the size of a small city had hit the planet at speed and killed most of the life on it. The humans were not there yet, but their ancestors were, small and frightened, hiding in the dark while the sky burned. They survived. The ice came next, great sheets of it grinding down from the poles, killing forests, sealing the water away. The humans survived that too. They buried their dead and kept moving. They faced things with teeth and claws and size that should have ended them 100 times over. They did not end. Instead, they made weapons from rocks, then from metal, then from physics itself. They split the atom. They reached the moon. They argued constantly about almost everything and somehow kept going anyway. The Dominion read none of this. The scouts had flagged the nuclear signatures in the historical record, noted the species had not destroyed itself yet, and moved on. Rawl's analysts had rated the weapons as primitive compared to Dominion standards, which was technically true. What they had not rated was the mind behind the weapons. What a species that had clawed its way out of an ice age and still had the energy to be curious about the stars might do when something new appeared in its sky. The blood-pack pods were loaded the next morning. There were 4 of them. Each pod held one creature, sedated, sealed in an atmospheric shell tuned to its biology. The loading crew worked quietly and kept their distance even through the containment walls. Every being on that ship had heard what these creatures did. Most had grown up hearing stories about them, the way children hear stories about monsters. Except these monsters were real, and they were currently being lowered into launch tubes with mechanical arms, because no one wanted to be in the same room as the pods. The Volkai went first. 8 legs, no eyes, and a hunting sense that read the electromagnetic pulses from a living heartbeat the way a human reads a sign. It had driven 3 separate species to extinction, not because it was sent to, because it was hungry and they had no answer for something they could not see, could not hear, and could not fool. The Dravith swarm followed. 3,000 individuals loaded across 40 secondary pods, acid-tipped talons, pack intelligence, and the ability to coordinate a strike from multiple directions simultaneously. They had stripped cities bare. They had turned skis black. The sound they made when they hunted was something that, once heard, was never quite gone from the memory. The Kethler was loaded last among the large ones, and the loading crew took a long break afterward and did not talk much for the rest of the shift. It was enormous, the size of a small hill, with a hide that energy weapons slid off like water off stone. It had been deployed 3 times in Dominion military history. All 3 times, the civilization on the receiving end had ceased to exist shortly afterward. The Shrike worm was the quiet one, long, pale, patient. It did not look dangerous until the ground started moving. It burrowed. It sent shockwaves through stone and soil that collapsed anything built on the surface. Fortifications, cities, bunkers. It did not care. It simply moved through the earth the way other things moved through air, and what was above it broke. Scientist Oru stood at the observation window and watched the pod seal into the launch tubes. He had been assigned to this deployment as the official xenobiological observer, which meant his job was to document the effects of the blood pack on the target species and submit a report to the council. He had done this twice before. Both times the report had been short. Both times the species in question had not survived long enough to generate much data. He pulled up the human files again while he waited. He read them slowly, the way he always read things, looking for the detail that did not fit. He found it on the 14th page, buried in a subsection about early human culture. Humans kept animals. Not as food only, though they did that too. They kept them as companions. They had taken the second most dangerous predator on their own planet, an animal with strong jaws and pack-hunting instincts, and over thousands of years had turned it into something that slept in their homes and learned to read their moods. They called it a dog. They did this entirely on purpose. They had looked at a predator and thought, I want to understand that. I want to make it mine. Oru closed the file. He thought about mentioning it to Raul. He decided to wait until after the deployment. The pods launched at midday ship time. They burned down through the atmosphere and scattered across 4 separate continents, each one chosen for maximum disruption. Dominion sensors watched the heat signatures spread across the surface of the planet. Then the watch crew began monitoring for what always came next. The humans should run. Every species ran. They would see the pods land, see the craters, and the instinct of any sensible creature would take over. Distance, shelter, silence. The first ground-level sensor report came in 40 minutes after landing. Human military units were moving toward all 4 impact sites. Not away, toward. The watch officer read the report twice. Then she walked to Raul's quarters and knocked on the door. He was awake. He read the report standing in the doorway, still holding the door. He read it again. He handed it back to her without a word and went to the bridge. Oru was already there, standing at the back of the room with his data pad, stylus moving slowly across the screen. They're moving toward the sites, Raul said. Yes, Oru said, I saw. They may not know what the pods contain. Oru considered this, or they want to find out. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Through the main screen, the planet turned slowly below them, blue and green and white, enormous and indifferent. Somewhere on its surface, something with 8 legs and no eyes was waking up in the dark. And something else, something small and soft and completely unremarkable by any biological standard the Dominion used, was walking toward it. The communications system crackled. A transmission from the surface. The translation software processed it in seconds, and the bridge heard a human voice, calm and unhurried, with a faint noise in the background that the system identified as wind. Command, we have visual on the first contact. It is big. We are moving in for a closer look. Nobody on the bridge said anything. Oru wrote one line on his data pad. They are moving closer. He underlined it. Then he waited to see what would happen next. The snow had been falling for 6 hours by the time the pod crater stopped smoking. It sat in the middle of a frozen plain in the far north, a dark scar in white ground, about 40 meters wide. The trees at the edge of the forest nearby had been knocked sideways by the impact. The air smelled like burned metal and something else underneath it, something animal, something alive. Private Lena Sood crouched at the tree line and watched the crater through her scope. She was 22 years old, had grown up in the northern wilderness, and had been hunting since she was old enough to hold a rifle steady. She did not spook easily, but she had been watching the crater for 12 minutes now, and she had counted 3 sets of tracks leading away from it that had not been there 10 minutes ago. 8-legged tracks, each print the size of a dinner plate. Darrow, she said quietly into her headset. The thing is already out of the pod. Captain Darrow Voss was 50 meters behind her, moving through the tree line with 4 other soldiers, all of them quiet, all of them watching the ground as much as the sky. He was a lean man in his mid-30s who had spent 8 years before the military working as a wildlife ranger in remote territories. He knew how to move without sound. He knew how to read a landscape. And right now the landscape was telling him something was watching them from a direction they hadn't identified yet. "I see the tracks," he said. "Don't fixate on the crater is old news." Lena pulled her eye from the scope and started scanning the surrounding tree line instead. The Volkai had been awake for 19 minutes. It was hungry, which was normal. It was cold, which was new. Its homeworld had been warm and wet, full of soft prey that panicked easily and made the hunt simple. This place was dry and frozen, and the prey here moved in a tight group and did not panic, which was unusual. Most prey panicked. Panic made them loud, made their hearts beat fast, made the electromagnetic signal clear and easy to follow. These ones were quiet. Their heartbeats were steady. The Volkai found this interesting in the way that a locked door is interesting to something that has never encountered one before. It moved through the trees without sound. 8 legs on snow leave almost no sound if the creature is careful, and the Volkai was always careful. It circled the group slowly, reading each heartbeat, measuring distance, choosing the one at the edge. Lena felt the hairs on her arm stand up a half-second before it moved. She threw herself sideways on pure instinct. The strike came from her left, not the direction she had been watching, and it hit the tree behind her instead of her, bark exploding outward in a spray of frozen splinters. She rolled, came up firing, hit nothing. The thing was already gone. "Contact left," she shouted, and the squad spread and turned, and the forest was suddenly full of movement and noise, and everyone was firing at things they could barely see. 2 soldiers went down in the first 30 seconds. Voss did not freeze. He had seen animals take people before. He had pulled a colleague out from under an animal twice his size with nothing but a hunting knife and refused to think about it until afterward. He dropped to a knee, not to hide but to watch. The creature attacked and vanished, each time from a different angle. Each strike was preceded by a fraction of a second where the air seemed to hum, a very low vibration that he felt more than heard. He noticed it the second time. He was certain of it the third time. "Lena," he said, voice flat and focused, "before each strike, do you feel the hum?" Lena was pressed against a tree with a shallow cut across her shoulder. "Yes, like something buzzing in your teeth." "It reads heartbeats," Voss said. "The hum is it locking on." He was already going through his kit in his head. Standard loadout, flares, grenades, EMP disruptors which they carried for disabling drone systems. EMP. Electromagnetic pulse. He pulled one out and looked at it for 1 second. The way a person looks at a tool when they've just thought of a use for it that it was never designed for. "Everyone get close together," he said. "Now tight group." The squad pulled in. They had learned not to question his tone when it went that flat and focused. Lena moved in from the left. The 2 remaining soldiers came in from the right. Voss triggered the EMP. The device was not loud. It made a sound like a camera flash and released a pulse that spread about 30 meters in every direction. In the trees, something screamed. It was not a sound any of them had heard before. High and jagged and full of something that sounded very much like pain. Then there was a crash, something heavy falling sideways into the snow, and then silence. "Did that work?" one of the soldiers said. "Go wide," Voss said. "Stay spread, don't group up again." They found it 20 meters into the trees. It had folded over itself, legs curled inward, still twitching. Its hunting sense had been overwhelmed by the pulse. It could not read anything. It was effectively blind. Lena raised her rifle. "Wait," Voss said. He crouched down next to the creature. Up close it was extraordinary. The body was covered in something between scales and fine hair, each one an individual sensory organ. The legs were jointed in 3 places instead of 2. The mouth was tucked underneath the head, almost invisible. He could see now why the scouts had never photographed it clearly. Even in the snow, barely 2 meters away, the thing seemed to blur slightly at the edges, as if his eyes kept sliding off it. He pulled out his field notebook. He wrote 3 things down. Legs 8, triple-jointed. No visible eyes. Attacks in a sequence. Circle, hum, lock, strike. Vulnerable to electromagnetic disruption. Check EMP range and pulse duration for scaling. He stood up and stepped back. Lena shot it cleanly, and it stopped moving. Voss looked at the 2 soldiers they had lost. He stood there for a moment, quiet. Then he knelt next to each of them for just a few seconds, not performing anything for anyone, just there. He stood back up. "Mark the coordinates," he said. "I want recovery teams for our people before anything else. Then I want samples from the creature for the science teams." "Samples," the soldier to his right said. "Skin, leg joint, sensory filaments if you can get them intact." Voss was already looking back at his notebook. "That triple joint structure is something I've never seen. I want to know how it carries that body weight in full sprint." They worked for the next 2 hours in the cold. Up in orbit, Oru watched the thermal feed with both his eyes open and his stylus motionless above his data pad. The creature was dead. The heat signature was fatting. The humans were moving carefully and quietly through the site, not celebrating, not panicking, just working. He watched one of them crouch next to the creature's body for a long time. He zoomed in on the feed. The human had something in his hands, small and rectangular, a writing instrument. He was taking notes. Oru set his own stylus down very carefully on the edge of his console. He had observed 11 first contact deployments in his career. He had seen species run, hide, prey, surrender, fight desperately and lose. He had never, in 11 deployments, seen the target species stop in the middle of the engagement to take notes on the attacking creature. He picked up his stylus again and wrote 3 words on his pad. "They are studying it." He looked at the words for a moment. Then he opened a new message and addressed it to Admiral Rawl. He wrote, "I would like to discuss the human behavioral file at your earliest convenience, specifically the section on domesticated animals." He sent it and went back to the feed. Below, the frozen plain was quiet now. The humans were collecting their dead with care, wrapping them in something and marking the location. One of them had set up a small portable light, and in the gray northern winter it made a small warm circle in the snow. Inside that circle they moved slowly and with purpose, doing the difficult steady work of soldiers after a hard thing. Not broken, not fleeing, just continuing. Oru found, to his own mild surprise, that he had no suitable category for what he was watching. He created a new one. The first sign was the birds. Every bird on the southern coast went silent at the same moment, the way they do before a storm, except there was no storm. The sky was clear and hot and blue. Then the birds did something stranger. They did not fly away. They landed, every one of them all at once, as if something in the air had told them to get low and stay there. Sergeant Bren Akaro noticed this because he had grown up near the coast, and he knew bird behavior the way a sailor knows wave patterns. He was sitting on a vehicle hood, eating a rice meal from a sealed pack when the birds dropped, and he stopped chewing and looked up. The sky to the south had changed color. It was still blue at the horizon, but higher up, coming from the direction of the ocean, there was a dark mass moving. At first it looked like a storm cloud, the kind that rolls in fast and changes the light before the rain hits. But it was moving wrong for a cloud. It was moving too fast, and it was too even, too dense, too deliberate. Then the sound reached them. It was not a single sound. It was 10,000 sounds made at the same time by 10,000 things, a high-layered shrieking that pressed against the ears and did not stop. The soldiers around Bren started looking up, started calculating distances, started moving toward vehicles and equipment. The evacuation of the nearby port city had been running for 6 hours already, ordered the moment the second alien pod was tracked hitting the ocean just off the coast. Most of the civilians were gone. Not all. Bren finished his rice. He sealed the pack and put it in his jacket pocket in case he wanted the rest later. "All units confirm position," he said into his radio, calm as a man reading a weather report. "Air defense, give me your status. I want the acoustic arrays up before they reach the coastline." The Dravith swarm was made of 3,000 individuals, and each one was roughly the size of a large bird of prey. The comparison was not wrong in shape. They had 2 sets of wings, a narrow armored body, and talons along both leg pairs that secreted acid strong enough to dissolve light vehicle armor in under 4 minutes. What made them truly dangerous was the intelligence. Not individual intelligence, swarm intelligence. Each individual creature was not especially smart, but 3,000 of them thinking in the same direction at the same moment, sharing sensory information the way a single brain shares it between neurons, produced something that could read a battlefield and adapt to it in real time. They had taken cities apart, not by accident or by brute destruction, by reading the defenses, finding the gaps, flowing through them like water through cracks. The first anti-air units opened fire when the swarm crossed the coastline. They hit hundreds. Hundreds more filled the gaps immediately, and the swarm kept coming, reshaping itself around the fire, splitting into threads and channels that slid between the trajectories. The firing solutions that had worked for the first minute stopped working because the swarm had read them and adjusted. It was not avoiding the fire consciously, the way a soldier ducks behind cover. It was doing it the way water avoids an obstacle, automatically, structurally, without any individual part of it making a decision. Bren watched this for about 90 seconds. He was not a scientist. He had not studied xenobiology or swarm theory. What he had done was spend 20 years in the military, 10 of those in environments where the standard plan stopped working inside the first hour. He had a very simple way of thinking about problems. He asked, "What does it need to work?" The swarm needed to see. It needed to share that sight across all 3,000 units instantly. It was navigating, and it was avoiding the specific lines of the weapon's fire, which meant it could read trajectory. It could model prediction. It was, in a meaningful sense, listening to the battlefield. Bren got on the radio. "I need the acoustic arrays repositioned," he said. "Not aimed at them, aimed at the ground in front of them. And I need the frequency set to variable pulse, not fixed." There was a pause from the other end. "Sergeant, the acoustic arrays are sonar-derived systems. They're designed for—" "I know what they're designed for," Bren said. "Do it anyway." Another pause, then, "Yes, Sergeant." While the arrays repositioned, Bren ate a few more bites of his rice. The swarm descended on the outer defense line, and the sound became enormous, the shrieking of the creatures and the weapon's fire, and underneath it all the pressure of something vast and coordinated pressing forward. 3 vehicles were stripped to frames in under 2 minutes. 2 soldiers were pulled from a position before the covering fire could stop it. Bren moved to cover, not running, walking fast, keeping his eyes on the swarm rather than watching his feet. The acoustic arrays came online. Variable pulse low-frequency sound, aimed not into the sky but across the ground, spreading outward in waves. Not a weapon, just noise. Complicated, shifting, unpredictable noise. The swarm's edge hit the sound field and stuttered. It was subtle at first. A ripple in the formation, the way a flock of birds will briefly lose shape before reforming. But the pulse kept shifting, the frequency kept changing, and the swarm's ability to share clean sensory information began to degrade. The information coming in from the forward units was suddenly full of interference. The swarm could not model trajectory cleanly anymore. It could not read the battlefield. The individual units without the collective intelligence to guide them, began to act individually. Individual Dravath were dangerous. 3,000 of them thinking individually in a compressed space, with interference disrupting their coordination, was chaos. They began to collide. Not catastrophically at first. Small errors. A unit banking left into another. A dive that clipped a wing. But each collision disrupted the sensory network more, and each disruption caused more individual errors, and within 4 minutes the outer edge of the swarm was folding into itself, thousands of creatures suddenly without the shared mind that made them more than just large aggressive birds. Bryn stepped out from cover. "Ground units push forward," he said. "Stay inside the acoustic field. Keep the arrays moving with you." The soldiers moved. The swarm, in confusion, could not coordinate a defense. What had been a terrifying unified weapon was now a very large number of frightened animals in a space that was suddenly loud in a way they could not process. The anti-air units, now with predictable individual trajectories to target, dropped them efficiently. It took 41 minutes from the moment the arrays activated to the moment the last of the swarm was down. Bryn stood in the middle of the aftermath and looked up at the sky. It was blue again, quiet. The birds were still on the ground, silent, and that silence felt very loud after the last hour. He found one of the Dravath that had gone down intact. It had hit the ground hard, but its body was undamaged. The wings folded awkwardly. The acid talons retracted in whatever passed for rest. He crouched next to it. He was not a scientist and he did not have a notebook, but he looked at it carefully for a long moment, at the layered wing structure, at the joint where the talons met the leg and the mechanism that allowed them to extend. "Incredible," he said quietly, to no one in particular. He stood up and pulled out his radio. "Command, this is Sergeant Okoro. Dravath swarm is neutralized. Requesting cleanup and recovery crews for our casualties. Also requesting one of the science teams be sent down here before anything gets processed." He thought for a second. "The big one on the east side of the impact zone is completely intact. Wing structure worth a look. The talon mechanism in particular." He paused. "Also requesting a replacement rice pack. Lost mine in the third engagement." On the Dominion Bridge, the watch officer looked at the thermal feed. The dark mass that had covered the coastline was gone. The swarm was down. She ran the numbers twice because she did not believe them the first time. 41 minutes. She pulled up the historical record for Dravath deployments. The fastest any species had ever neutralized a full swarm was 11 days, and that species had lost 60% of its standing military doing it. She walked to the center console where Admiral Rahl was standing with his arms crossed, watching the same feed. 41 minutes, she said. Rahl said nothing. "They use sound," she said. "They jammed the swarm's collective processing with acoustic interference." Still nothing from Rahl. "Sir, they developed the countermeasure during the engagement. They didn't know what the swarm was when it arrived." Rahl looked at the feed for a while longer. Then he turned slowly and looked at Oru, who was at the back of the bridge as he always was, watching, stylus moving. "Oru," Rahl said. "Yes, Admiral. That message you sent me, about the domesticated animals." "Yes, Admiral. Write the full report, everything you have. I want it on my desk in 2 hours." Oru nodded and went back to writing. Below, on the quiet coastline, the birds slowly began to move again. First one, then a few, then all of them at once, lifting off the ground and filling the air above the city with the ordinary sound of wings. 3 days before the Kethler came ashore, the ocean started behaving strangely. The fishing boats noticed first, not military, not scientists. Ordinary fishing boats working the deep water off the western coast, men and women who had spent their lives reading the sea, who knew its rhythms the way most people know the layout of their own homes. They noticed the water moving wrong, not waves, not current, something underneath. A pressure shift that came from below rather than across, slow and immense, like the sea itself was breathing. They came in early, and they told the harbor master what they had felt. The harbor master passed it up the chain. By the time it reached Colonel Adisa N. Wands at the Regional Military Command, the seismic sensors had already logged something. A mass displacement in the deep water, too large to be a geological event, too slow to be a pressure wave. Moving, heading west, heading toward the coast. N. Wands had read the briefing on the alien deployment. She had read all of it, including the file attachments, including the section that most people skimmed or skipped, the section titled BLOODPACK Biological PROFILES, third entry. The Kethler. She had read that entry twice and then gone very still for a few minutes, which was not a thing she did easily. The file said, no successful countermeasure documented, 3 deployments, 3 target civilizations eliminated, hide resistant to all standard energy-based and kinetic weapons at tested force levels, advise full withdrawal from coastal regions if deployment confirmed. N-Wands ordered the coastal cities evacuated. 2 million people over 36 hours. The roads were packed and the weather was bad, and it was the largest movement of people the region had seen in a generation. She coordinated it with the same focused stillness she had brought to every hard task in her career, checking each sector, moving resources, keeping the lines of communication open. She did not tell people what was coming. She told them to go. On the third day, the sea changed color near the horizon. A deep disturbance came up from below, dark water pushed aside by something that did not belong in the natural order of the ocean. Then the surface broke. The Kethler rose from the water slowly, the way a continent might rise if continents moved, enormously and without any apparent effort. It was built like nothing the sea normally produced. It had mass where mass had no right to be, its body structure dense beyond what the water should have supported, its movement mechanical and purposeful. The water fell off it in rivers. It turned toward the coast and walked, because the depth here was no obstacle to something that size, and the seafloor was just a surface to move on. The Navy was waiting. N-Wands had assembled every surface vessel and submarine available in the region. They opened fire before the Kethler reached shallow water. The sound was extraordinary, a sustained rolling thunder across the whole coastal horizon, and from the shore the flashes of the weapons were visible even in daylight. The Kethler kept walking. The weapons did not stop it. They did not slow it. The energy weapons spread across its hide and scattered like light on dark water. The kinetic rounds hit and did nothing that mattered. The creature did not accelerate, did not respond, did not seem to register the attack at all. It simply walked toward the coast and then onto it, and the ground under its weight cracked and the buildings at the shore's edge began to fail. N-Wan's watch from a command post set several kilometers back. She had been in communication with Voss since the previous night. He had been pulled from the north after the Vaokai engagement and was currently in an aircraft 90 minutes out, with a data pad in his hands and a file open on it that he had been reading since takeoff. Not the Dominion's file, not the military's file. A file assembled by a team of xenobiologists who had spent 20 hours going through every piece of intelligence recovered from the alien drop pods, and the scout data captured by human signals teams in the first 12 hours after the fleet arrived. Voss was not a xenobiologist, but he had a quality that was worth more than the right degree in the right moment. He read things and he noticed what didn't fit. He found it on page 31. A note added almost as an afterthought by one of the junior researchers on the team. A single paragraph about the Kethler's evolutionary origin. It had developed on a world that was primarily water, low oxygen, high pressure, a specific atmospheric chemistry very different from standard. The creature's entire metabolic process was built around that chemistry. On Earth, it was breathing the wrong air. Not fatally, not immediately. The creature was large enough and robust enough that the difference would not kill it quickly, but the oxygen content of Earth's atmosphere was measurably higher than its native world. Its metabolism was running, in simple terms, hot. Every breath it took on Earth was slightly toxic to it. Voss read the paragraph 3 times. Then he called N1s. "Stop shooting at it," he said. A pause. On the coast behind her, the sound of the weapons was still going. "Voss, the Navy is not going to stop." "I'm not saying stop the Navy. I'm saying what we're doing isn't the plan. Give me 4 hours when I land, and I need 2 things. I need the industrial chemistry team from the Eastern Response Unit, and I need everything we have on the atmospheric composition of the Kethler's home system." N1s looked at the data on her screen. The Kethler was currently working through what had been the port district of the city. The buildings there were empty. The damage was extraordinary to see and meaningless in practical terms since no one was in them. 4 hours, she said. "Less if I can manage it," Voss said. He landed, looked at the creature from a distance for approximately 3 minutes with his notebook in hand, and then went to work with the chemistry team. What they built over the next several hours was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing that would be written up in clean, technical language later. It was assembled from industrial oxygen concentrators, agricultural equipment used for soil treatment, modified dispersal drones that had been designed for crop dusting, and several large canisters of compounds that Voss admitted openly he was using in a sequence that had not been formally tested. The idea was simple. The Kethler was being slowly damaged by Earth's atmosphere. What if the atmosphere in its immediate vicinity were made considerably worse? The drones went up at dusk. They released the compounds in a spreading cloud over the Kethler's position. The concentrators, positioned upwind, fed elevated oxygen into the release zone. The Kethler was suddenly walking through air that was significantly more hostile to its metabolism than ordinary Earth atmosphere. Nothing happened for the first 20 minutes. Then the creature slowed. Not stopped, slowed. Its movement became less certain, its steps less even. It turned, and for the first time it turned away from the inland direction it had been moving and toward the water. The behavior was not aggression or panic. It was something more basic. It was an organism responding to discomfort, moving away from the bad air toward the thing it knew. N1's watched from the command post. The Kethler walked back into the sea, slowly, heavily, with the same indifferent patience it had shown coming out of it, but going the other direction now. It went deeper. It went past the point where the shore-based sensors could track it. The naval vessels followed at a distance, monitoring. It did not come back. 3 hours later, it was located 40 kilometers offshore, stationary in deep water. It was not dead, but it was not moving inland again. The deep water had the chemistry it needed. Voss sat on a concrete barrier at the edge of what had been the port district and looked at the damage. Enormous, but that was physics, not malice. The creature had not been attacking. It had been moving. There was a difference, and somehow that difference mattered to him in a way he could not fully explain. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Kethler dependent on low-oxygen atmospheric chemistry. Exposure to elevated O2 causes metabolic stress sufficient to trigger retreat behavior. Further study needed on long-term physiological effects. Recommend containment research if specimen can be approached safely in deep-water environment." He thought for a moment, then he added may be possible, worth exploring. He closed the notebook and looked out at the water. Oru's report had been on Ral's desk for 6 hours by this point. Ral had read it once and was reading it again. The report was thorough and careful, and Oru had written it the way he wrote everything, without drama, just observation laid out in order. But the conclusion, the last 2 pages, was unlike anything Ral had read in a formal military document before. Oru's conclusion was this: they had sent the wrong thing to Earth, not the wrong creatures, the wrong signal entirely. The blood pack was a message meant to say, "You cannot survive us," But humanity did not receive that message. What they received, based on every behavioral indicator Oru had tracked across 4 separate engagements, was closer to here are 4 new things we have never seen before. And the humans, every single time, had responded the way they always responded to new things. They had gone to look. Rahl set the report down. He looked at the planet on the screen for a long time. Blue and green and white, enormous and quiet, the ocean glittering where the sun hit it. He thought about the Kethler, about something that had ended 3 civilizations now sitting quietly in deep water 40 kilometers offshore, because a human had read a footnote on page 31. He thought about what Oru had written at the very end of the report, the last sentence, the one he had underlined twice. We did not send our weapons to destroy them. We sent them educational material. The earthquake monitors picked it up at 4 in the morning, and for the first 40 seconds, the night shift geologist at the monitoring station thought it was a real earthquake. Then she looked at the pattern. Earthquakes do not move in straight lines. Geological events spread from a point, they radiate. They are uneven because the Earth itself is uneven. What was on her screen was moving. Steadily, consistently, turning when it turned, adjusting its path the way something alive adjusts its path. She sat looking at the screen for a full minute, then picked up the phone. By the time the military response teams were deploying, 3 things had already happened. The farmland in the southern plains had begun to show long, raised ridges where the soil was being pushed up from below, like the seam on a piece of cloth that has been pulled from underneath. 2 small towns had been evacuated after the buildings began to crack at the foundations. Hairline fractures first, then the kind of fractures that make a building unsafe in minutes. And the seismic sensors had gotten a clearer picture of what was moving under the ground. 400 meters long, moving at roughly 12 kilometers per hour, burrowing through solid earth and stone the way something much smaller moves through soil. Lena Sood had been pulled south after the Volkai engagement. She was standing in a field at sunrise watching the ground move. Not metaphorically. The ground itself was moving, rising and falling in a long, slow wave that came from the east and traveled west, and the sensation of standing on it was deeply wrong in a way that her body understood before her mind caught up. "Time it," she said to the soldier standing next to her. "Time what?" "How long between the rise and the fall? The rhythm, it must have one." The soldier looked at her, then he looked at the ground, then he pulled out his phone. Lena was not sure why she was timing it yet. She had learned to trust the instinct that said, when something moves, it moves in a pattern, and if you know the pattern, you know the thing. It was how she had hunted all her life, not chasing the animal, finding where the animal was going to be. Voss arrived by vehicle 2 hours after sunrise, having come directly from the coast where he had spent most of the night coordinating the Kethler situation. He had slept for 90 minutes in the vehicle. He had also, in those 90 minutes, read everything available on the Shrike worm, which was less than he had hoped. The Dominion data captured by intelligence teams had extensive records of its effects and almost nothing on its biology. What it did was well documented. What it was remained thin. He met Lena at the edge of the active zone, the area where the ground movement was currently strongest. She handed him her notebook. She had been timing the surface waves for 2 hours. She had mapped the pattern. "It surfaces every 43 minutes," she said. "Or something like it, not exactly. There's some variation, but there's a rhythm. And when it gets close to the surface, the soil temperature goes up. You can feel it on the sole of your boot before the ridge comes." Voss looked at her timing logs. The variation was not random. It was biological. The way a heartbeat has a rhythm but not a mechanical one. He thought of something from the file. The Shrike worm used vibration to navigate. It sent out pulses and read the echoes back, like sonar but through stone instead of water. It was reading the landscape as it moved, which meant the landscape was information to it. "If it reads what's around it," Voss said slowly, and it adjusts its path based on what it reads. Then we can feed it false information, Lena finished. Voss looked at her. She shrugged. I've been standing here for 2 hours thinking. They called the engineering teams. They called the mining division, because the people who understood what you could do to ground with controlled explosions were the people who worked in deep mining. The conversation between Voss and the lead mining engineer was unusual and lasted almost 40 minutes, and at the end of it, the engineer was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's insane. I want to be there when we try it." Over the next 36 hours, while the Shrike worm continued its slow and devastating path through the southern plains, collapsing anything built on the surface as it passed, they prepared. They placed deep bore charges in a grid pattern, not directly over the worm's path, beside it, ahead of it, in a sequence designed not to destroy but to redirect. Each detonation would send a specific vibration down into the ground. The pattern of those vibrations, if the theory was right, would read to the worm as geology, as the shape of the landscape, hard stone to the north, soft passage to the south. If the theory was wrong, they would have set off a very large number of expensive explosives in a farm field, and still have a 400-meter worm destroying the countryside. "How confident are you?" Enwans asked Voss when he walked her through the plan. "I'm confident in the logic," Voss said. "I've never tested it." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it's not." She approved it anyway. The first detonations went off at midnight, timed to coincide with the worm's positioning under the eastern sector of the grid. The ground shook. The boom was heard in towns 12 kilometers away. Lena was at the monitoring station, watching the seismic feed when the worm's path shifted. It shifted south. Not much, 8 degrees, but it was a change, and it was in the right direction. They detonated the next sequence. The worm shifted again. Over the next 6 hours, with the engineering teams coordinating detonations from the surface and Lena watching the seismic feed and calling adjustments, they walked the Shrike worm in a slow arc across the plains, not fighting it, not blocking it, but guiding it, the way you guide something large and powerful, not by opposing it, but by making one direction easier than another. They walked it into a salt flat in the southwest, an area of dead geology, flat and dense and minerally strange, where the ground told the worm almost nothing it could use to navigate. The vibration-damping equipment that the acoustic team had repurposed from the Dravith engagement was set up around the perimeter, running constant interference into the substrate. The worm slowed. It circled. It could not read the terrain here. It could not find a clear path. It was not in pain. It was not trapped in any physical sense. It was simply in a place where the information it needed to move purposefully did not exist. They had been prepared for this part to take days. It took 17 hours. The chemical team worked in rotating shifts, dropping compounds from low-flying aircraft into the zone. The compounds were sedative in the way that something designed for a creature that large needed to be, which meant the doses were enormous, and the delivery systems were agricultural aircraft loaded to their maximum capacity. Oru's data on the Shrike worm had included a brief biological note on its nervous system, flagged as low priority in the Dominion files, because no one had ever expected anyone to need to sedate one. When the worm finally slowed its movement to nearly nothing and its seismic signature dropped to just a faint tremor, the ground over its resting position was marked and fenced, and the biology teams were called. Lena was one of the first to walk out over the marked ground. She could feel the faint warmth through her boots still, the temperature of something very large still running its slow metabolism below her. She crouched down and put her hand flat on the earth. "It's still alive," she told Voss when he came up beside her. "Good," he said. She looked at him. "Good. We want it alive. Something that burrows through solid stone at 12 kilometers an hour and uses vibrational sonar to navigate." He was already writing. The potential applications alone. Voss, Lena said. In deep mining and geological survey work, if the behavioral patterns can be mapped in detail. Voss. He looked up from the notebook. We just herded a 400-meter worm into a pen using farm explosives and crop dusters, she said. Can we take 5 minutes before we start talking about applications? He considered this. 4 minutes, he said. They stood in the quiet of the salt flat as the sun came up, the ground warm below them, the air still. All around them, engineering teams were photographing and documenting and measuring, and the biology team's trucks were pulling up at the perimeter with their equipment, and somewhere to the north, a detonation team was doing a final check on the bore charges they'd used. 4 minutes. On the Dominion Bridge, no one was talking. Rahl was looking at the thermal feed showing the Shrike worm's location. Still. Contained. The creature that had ended 3 campaigns without effort, the one thing in the blood pack that Rahl had personally believed could not be countered, was sedated in a human-made enclosure in a salt flat. His tactical officer, who had been with him through the entire deployment, spoke very quietly. Admiral, she said, they captured it. Rahl said nothing for a long time. Then slowly, send a message to Dominion High Command, priority channel, tell them he stopped, thought. Tell them we need to revisit the threat assessment for Target 7, significantly. What threat level should I suggest? Rahl watched the feed. Tell them I'll send a recommendation once I've thought about what number feels honest, he said. The council chamber on the Dominion flagship was built to impress. It had been built that way on purpose, high ceilings, dark stone paneling brought from the Dominion homeworld, lighting that fell from above in a way that made everyone at the table feel small, and the Dominion itself feel large. 17 civilizations had sent representatives through those doors over the centuries. Most of them had arrived afraid. The room was designed to encourage that. Rahl had never noticed the room's design before. He noticed it now because it suddenly seemed like the kind of thing a species does when it is not entirely sure of itself. You make the ceiling high enough that the other person has to look up. He sat at the head of the table and looked at his council. 9 members, senior commanders and administrators from the 7 Dominion worlds that had contributed to this campaign. They had all read the reports. He could tell by their faces, which in 7 different alien anatomies all managed to convey the same expression. The expression of a person who has opened a door expecting a familiar room and found a very large drop on the other side. Oru stood at the far end of the table and presented his findings without drama, the way he did everything. He laid the timeline out in order. The Volkai, neutralized in 4 hours, countermeasure developed during the engagement using equipment designed for a different purpose entirely. The Dravath, 41 minutes, countermeasure developed during the engagement, no precedent for it in any documented species response. The Kethlur, driven off using atmospheric chemistry, identified from a footnote in secondary documentation that the Dominion's own analysts had flagged as low priority. The Shrike worm, captured alive. He paused on that last point. Captured, he said again, because several faces at the table suggested they might have heard the word wrong. He had a recording. He played it. It was from the human biology team's initial survey of the Shrike worm's containment site, 9 hours after sedation. Humans in protective equipment moving around the perimeter of the enclosure, taking readings, and in the background, clearly audible, 2 of them arguing in an animated way about something. The translation system processed it in real time and put text on the screen above the recording. The argument was about which part of the worm's anatomy should be sampled first. They were arguing about it with the kind of energy that people bring to a topic they find genuinely exciting. The council was quiet for a long moment. They want to study it, one of the council members said. She was from the 3rd Dominion world, a civilization that had spent 8 centuries cataloging biological threats across their sector of space. They have one of our weapons in containment, and they are arguing about which end to look at first. Yes, Oru said. These are the same creatures we rated threat level 1. Yes, Oru said again. Another council member, the senior military commander from the 7th World, leaned forward. His people had contributed the Vaokai to the Blood Pack, a creature that had emerged from their own northern territories 2 centuries ago and taken 30 years to drive back. I want to propose escalation, he said. We have not deployed our full catalog. There are 200 additional organisms on record. We can. I've run those numbers, Rahl said. It was the first thing he had said since the session opened. Everyone at the table looked at him. I ran them last night, he continued. I took every organism in the current Blood Pack catalog and I estimated, based on the response times and countermeasure development rates we've observed over the last 8 days, how long each engagement would take. Then I added a factor for human adaptation rate, because each engagement they run teaches them more than the last. He looked around the table. The catalog runs out before the humans do. The room was quiet. The Kethler took them 3 days to resolve, he continued. The Shrike Worm took 36 hours. The time between problem and solution is dropping, not because they know what our creatures are, because they are getting better at learning fast. Each engagement makes them faster at the next one. He sat back. If we send the catalog, we are not fighting them. We are training them. The commander from the 7th World looked at the table. He did not speak again. Oru cleared his throat. There is another consideration, he said. If we continue the engagement and they eventually identify the source of the Blood Pack, the breeding stations, the collection worlds, there is a question of what they do with that information. He paused. Based on behavioral analysis, I believe they would want to go there, not to destroy, to look. One of the council members made a short sound that in their language was somewhere between disbelief and dread. They would come here. Not with hostility, I think, Oru said. Curiosity, which in practical terms may be more difficult to manage. Rahl opened the diplomatic channel himself. He did not ask someone else to do it. He sat at the primary communications console, dismissed the operator politely, and opened the channel on the frequency the humans had published for external contact in the first 48 hours after the fleet's arrival. They had published a contact frequency in the first 48 hours, while alien creatures were being deployed on their surface. Oru had flagged this in his report as indicative of something, and Rahl had read that section 4 times. The channel connected. There was a pause, the sound of background noise, something mechanical, something that smelled like coffee according to the olfactory sensors, though that could not be transmitted through the channel, and he had only the notation to go on. Then a voice, Voss. Rahl recognized it from the recordings, calm, unhurried. This is Captain Darrow Voss, Earth Response Coordination. Go ahead. Rahl had prepared what he was going to say. He had notes. He had talked with Oru about framing and with the Council about the formal language of Dominion diplomatic opening. He set all of that aside and said the simple version instead. This is Admiral Sen Rahl of the Galactic Dominion's 7th Reach Fleet. I am opening a channel for the purpose of formal diplomatic contact. The Dominion is prepared to suspend all current operations and begin negotiations with the government of your world. A pause, not a long one. Understood, Admiral, Voss said. We're glad to hear that. Another brief pause, a sound of something, paper maybe. I'll connect you with the relevant people for the formal diplomatic process, but while I have you, I wanted to ask a few things if that's all right. Rahl had not expected this. You want to ask questions? We have a few, yes, mostly about the creatures. The voice was completely even, not aggressive, not nervous, just practical. The one you deployed in the northern tundra, the 8-legged one. We recovered the body intact and we've done preliminary analysis, but we're missing context on the sensory organ structure. The filaments on the outer leg segment, are those independent organs or are they connected to a central processing structure? We can't tell from the exterior anatomy. Rawl looked at Oru. Oru had an expression on his face that, in his species' anatomy, meant something between profound respect and genuine alarm. I don't have that information immediately available, Rawl said carefully. No problem, we can work it out ourselves, it'll just take longer. The sound of writing. The large ocean creature, the one we redirected offshore, it's still in the deep water 40 kilometers out. We'd like to study it at some point if that's possible. Non-invasive survey only to start. And we'd want full environmental data on its native atmosphere so we can make sure the conditions are right for it. Another pause. We don't want it suffering. Rawl was quiet for a moment. You want to make sure the creature that destroyed the coastal infrastructure of your city is not suffering. It was just moving, Voss said simply. It wasn't doing it to us. It didn't know we were there. The voice did not apologize for this logic. It just stated it the way you state a fact. And the worm. We have it in containment in the southern salt flat. It's stable and it's eating. We have it on a substrate vibration diet, simulated prey signals. But we'd love the native geological composition of wherever it's from so we can replicate the environment more accurately. It seems to prefer the eastern section of the enclosure, and we think it might be a mineral gradient issue. The council chamber on the flagship was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Oru wrote on his pad, "They are already caring for it." Rawl looked at his notes for the diplomatic speech. He folded them once, neatly, and put them away. "Captain Voss," he said, "I will send you what we have, all of it. The biological files on all 4 organisms, the environmental data, the full profiles." A pause from the human end, short and genuinely surprised. "That's very generous, Admiral, thank you." "I have a question in return," Rawl said. "Of course. When my fleet appeared in your sky, when the pods landed, were you afraid?" A longer pause this time. The background noise on the channel. Wind, maybe, something moving in the distance. "Yes," Voss said finally. "Of course we were. We lost people." He paused again. "But afraid and stopped are different things. We were afraid and curious at the same time. Mostly we wanted to know what we were dealing with." Rawl ended the call. He sat for a moment. Behind him, one of the council members spoke quietly. "Do we reclassify them?" "Yes," Rawl said. "What level?" He thought about a species that had walked toward every creature designed to end them. That had taken notes while fighting for their lives. That had captured the galaxy's most destructive living weapon and were now worried about its mineral diet. "There isn't a level for them yet," he said. "We'll need to create one." Below the fleet, on the surface of the planet, in a temporary research station in the southern salt flat, the ground was still warm from the creature resting under it. Someone had set up a portable light for the night shift, and in its yellow glow Voss sat on a folding chair with his notebook on his knee and a drink in his other hand, looking out across the flat at nothing in particular. Lena came and sat beside him on an upturned crate. "They're sending the biological files," he told her. She thought about this, all of them. All of them. She looked out at the flat. Somewhere out there, 40 kilometers of ocean away, something ancient and enormous was resting in the dark water. Below their feet, something that had moved through stone like it was water was breathing slowly in sedated sleep. In the north, in a cold storage facility, something that had ended civilizations was being examined by a team that had already named the individual sensory filaments. "What do you think they want?" she asked. "The same thing everyone wants eventually," Voss said. "Someone to talk to." The stars were coming out now, one by one, and the fleet was up there among them. 17 civilizations worth of ships in a ring around the planet. From the ground they looked like new stars. A lot of them. Voss looked up. He had more pages left in his notebook. He was going to need them.